Has Tanzania discovered a formula for peace? Tanzania has done something many countries never managed to do. Located in a region marked by coups, civil wars, and ethnic conflict. And yet, for more than 6 decades, Tanzania remained one of Africa's most politically stable countries. But that stability is facing challenges. In the 2025 election, Tanzania experienced one of the darkest moments in its history. An election was held. A ruling party declared victory. The main opposition party was absent. Protests erupted. Many people died. How many? The answer depends on who you ask. And Tanzania confronted a much deeper question. Can peace survive without justice? To understand Tanzania's political sphere, its elections and challenges, we have to go back over 6 decades to the moment the country decided what kind of state it wanted to become. Every headline has a deeper story. Every story has a wider context. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines. If you're curious about the world behind the news, subscribe and join us. To understand the situation Tanzania is facing today, we first have to understand the state Tanganyika inherited. Yes, Tanganyika. Because before Tanzania was Tanganyika. We will shortly see in this episode that Tanzania was born after the union between Tanganyika and Zanzibar. When Tanganyika became independent on December 9, 1961, there was no guarantee that the new country would remain stable. It was geographically vast. Its population spoke more than 120 indigenous languages. Political institutions were young. The economy remained deeply shaped by colonial rule. And across Africa, independence was producing both extraordinary optimism and profound political uncertainty. In January 1961, Patrice Lumumba was killed in the Congo. By 1963, Togo had experienced the first successful military coup in independent sub-Saharan Africa. Nigeria would later descend into military rule and civil war. Uganda's post-independence political settlement would collapse. Burundi would experience coups, assassinations, and repeated ethnic violence. This was the world in which Tanganyika's political institutions were being built. And for the leaders of the new state, these were not distant events. They were warnings. The central question was not simply, how should Tanganyika be governed? But it was, how do you build a nation before political competition tears it apart? To understand the answer, we first have to understand the state Tanganyika inherited. Tanganyika was first colonized by Germany. After Germany lost the First World War, Tanganyika became a British-administered territory under the League of Nations mandate system and later the United Nations trusteeship system. British rule in Tanganyika was different from British rule in neighboring Kenya. Kenya became a major settler colony. Tanganyika did not. Britain governed largely through a policy known as indirect rule. The principle was simple. Instead of building an entirely new administration from the center, colonial authorities governed through local chiefs and so-called native authorities. District officers supervised territories. Provincial administrators connected districts to the central government. Authority traveled downward. Information traveled upward. This was an efficient system for governing a vast territory with a relatively small colonial administration. But it left an important institutional inheritance. The state was centralized. Administrators represented the central authority in the regions and districts. Local administration was primarily designed to implement decisions, not to act as an autonomous center of political power. Independence changed who controlled the state. But it did not erase the administrative machinery overnight. The new government inherited ministries, district administration, a civil service, security institutions, and a political geography in which power flowed strongly from the center. This matters because constitutions are never written on empty paper. New governments inherit institutions, and inherited institutions shape the choices. If you're still with me, stay here a little longer, because we are now approaching one of the most important moments in Tanzania's political history. What we are going to discuss next helps explain questions that would return decades later, right into the elections of 2025. And let's begin with TANU. But Tanganyika inherited something else that would prove equally important: a nationalist movement with extraordinary political reach. The Tanganyika African National Union, TANU, was established in 1954 under the leadership of Julius Nyerere. Calling TANU simply a political party can be misleading. It was a national liberation movement. Its primary political objective was independence. And that objective gave TANU an enormous strategic advantage. Instead of organizing primarily around one ethnic group, one religion or one region, TANU presented itself as a national movement. It built branches across the territory. It mobilized workers, farmers, teachers and local leaders, and it used Kiswahili to communicate a political identity that could cross ethnic boundaries. This was crucial. Tanganyika contained more than 100 ethnic groups, but unlike some other African states, no single ethnic group was large enough to dominate national politics alone. TANU turned that diversity into a political argument. If independence belonged to the whole country, then the movement fighting for independence should also belong to the whole country. By the time independence arrived, TANU was overwhelmingly dominant. And this created a paradox. Tanganyika formally inherited a competitive parliamentary system. But politically, one movement already occupied most of the national political space. The political system established at independence looked familiar to anyone who knew Britain. Tanganyika began with a Westminster-style parliamentary system. Julius Nyerere became Prime Minister. The British monarch remained the formal head of state, represented in Tanganyika by a Governor-General. The government depended upon Parliament. The Prime Minister headed the executive. In constitutional design, power was divided between a ceremonial head of state and a political head of government. But the system lasted for only 1 year. In 1962, Tanganyika became a republic. The office of the Prime Minister was abolished. The Governor-General disappeared, and a new office emerged at the center of the state: the Executive President. Why abandon Westminster so quickly? Part of the answer was symbolic. A newly independent African country wanted its own head of state. But the debate went deeper. The parliamentary model had been inherited from Britain. Many nationalist leaders questioned whether a system developed through centuries of British political history was necessarily appropriate for a new African state facing rapid nation-building and development. There was also a practical argument. The new government wanted decisive executive leadership. A president directly associated with the national mandate could coordinate the state, direct development, and symbolize national unity. In 1962, Tanganyika therefore concentrated the roles of head of state and head of government in one office. The president became the center of executive authority. This happened before the formal one-party rule. That distinction is important. Tanzania's powerful presidency was not created by the 1992 multi-party system. It was not created by the 1977 constitution, and it was not created by the politics of 2025. Its foundations were laid at the beginning of the Republic. Then came a more difficult question. If TANU already represented the overwhelming majority of politically organized Tanganyika, what purpose did competing political parties serve? Nyerere developed one of the most influential arguments for one-party democracy in post-colonial Africa. His reasoning began with a rejection of a simple assumption: that democracy necessarily required multiple political parties. In European history, political parties had often emerged from deep social divisions: class, religion, economic interests, regional identities. But Nyerere argued that Tanganyika's independence movement had created a broad national political consensus. The central national objective had been independence. After independence, the central objective was development. From this perspective, importing competing parties could create divisions that did not yet exist politically. Nyerere's argument was that Tanzania should not wait for that political culture to develop. Political competition should exist, but it should occur inside a common national movement. One party, multiple candidates for a member of parliament. Citizens could choose between individuals. They could reject sitting members of parliament. They could debate policy, but the competition would take place within a shared political framework. For the presidential candidate, the party's central committee would propose the name, and citizens would vote yes or no during the election. The theory was not no democracy. The theory was democracy without competing parties. And this is where Tanzania's story becomes more complicated than the simple label one-party dictatorship. Under the one-party system, elections did not disappear. For many parliamentary constituencies, voters could choose between two candidates approved through the party process. Sitting members of parliament could lose. Campaigns occurred. Candidates competed over local performance, leadership, and representation. Studies of Tanzania's one-party elections found significant turnover among members of parliament. The ballot therefore retained an element of political choice. But there was a clear boundary around that choice. Voters could decide who represented the system. They could not vote to replace the system itself. TANU, and later CCM, defined the constitutional political arena. An alternative political organization could not campaign to form the national government. A citizen could reject a candidate, but not the ruling party. This is the distinction at the center of Tanzania's one-party democracy. There was competition, but competition existed within a single-party system. In 1965, this political philosophy became constitutional architecture. The interim constitution formally declared Tanzania a one-party state. On the mainland, political activity operated through TANU. In Zanzibar, through the Afro-Shirazi Party. Political activity was to be conducted under the auspices of the recognized party. This was more than electoral dominance. The party now occupied a constitutional position within the state. Parliament continued to exist. Courts continued to operate. Government ministries continued their work. Elections continued. But political legitimacy increasingly flowed through the party. And in 1967, the Arusha Declaration gave the system an ideological direction. Ujamaa, socialism, self-reliance. The state was no longer expected simply to maintain order. It would transform society, expand education, build health services, restructure rural development, nationalize major sectors of the economy, and create a national identity that transcends tribe. To accomplish this, Tanzania built a political system designed for mobilization. The party communicated national policy downward. Local structures mobilized citizens. Regional and district administrators implemented government programs. The state, administration, and ruling party became increasingly intertwined. This system could move policy across the country. But it also made one question increasingly difficult to answer. Where did the party end and the state begin? Any serious assessment of this period must confront an uncomfortable fact for both admirers and critics of the one-party state. Some of its nation-building objectives worked. Tanzania did not become politically organized primarily around ethnic parties. Kiswahili developed into one of Africa's most successful national languages. The army did not repeatedly overthrow civilian governments. Despite extraordinary diversity, Tanzanian national identity became remarkably strong. And when Julius Nyerere voluntarily left the presidency in 1985, power transferred peacefully. These achievements matter. They help explain why many Tanzanians continued to associate CCM and the political tradition created under Nyerere with amani or peace, stability, unity. For a country surrounded by examples of political collapse, those were not abstract achievements. They were living history. But institutional success creates its own political inheritance. The institutions designed to protect unity become powerful. The presidency becomes central. The administrative state becomes accustomed to implementing policy from the center. The ruling party develops structures across every region, and organized opposition disappears for almost 3 decades. Then imagine changing only one thing, allowing new political parties. What happens to everything else? In 1977, TANU and Zanzibar's Afro-Shirazi party merged to form Chama cha Mapinduzi, CCM. The same year, Tanzania adopted a new constitution. The 1977 constitution consolidated the political order that had developed over the previous 15 years. The president remained head of state, head of government, and commander-in-chief. Executive authority remained centered on the presidency. The union between mainland Tanzania and Zanzibar retained its unusual two-government structure. Zanzibar maintained its own government for non-union matters, but there was no separate Tanganyika government. The union government also governed mainland affairs, and CCM occupied the constitutionally recognized position of the country's sole political party. By this point, Tanzania had built a coherent political system, a strong presidency, a centralized administration, a nationwide party, a political culture that valued unity, and elections that permitted competition within the ruling structure. The system had been designed to answer the fears of the independence generation: ethnic fragmentation, regionalism, political instability, weak government. But political systems are often tested not by the problems they were designed to solve, but by the problems that emerge later. By the late 1980s, Tanzania was changing. The economy was liberalizing. The Cold War was ending. Across Africa, demands for political pluralism were growing. One-party governments were facing a new question. If a single-party system had helped build the nation, when should political competition begin? And in Tanzania, that question was particularly difficult, because introducing opposition parties was easy to describe: change the law, register new parties, hold multi-party elections. But Tanzania's political system was not simply a law banning opposition parties. It was a network of institutions built over 30 years. The presidency, the constitution, the administration, the electoral machinery, the relationship between party and state, the legal framework governing political organization. So when Tanzania finally confronted the future of one-party rule, the real question was much bigger than should there be more political parties. The real question was, can institutions built for a single-party system become neutral referees of political competition? In 1991, President Ali Hassan Mwinyi appointed a commission to find an answer. Its chairman was Chief Justice Francis Nyalali. What the commission discovered would expose one of the deepest contradictions in Tanzania's political system. Most of the people it consulted appeared to support one-party rule, but many of the reforms they demanded challenged the one-party state itself. And this is where the next part of our story begins. Because Tanzania was about to make a historic decision to allow political competition again. But allowing new parties was the easy part. The harder question was what to do with the institutions, laws, and constitutional structures built during almost 3 decades of one-party rule. In Part 2, we examine the Nyalali Commission, the return of multi-party politics, and a question that still shapes Tanzania's elections today. What changed in 1992, and what remained? The headlines tell us what happened. Understanding begins when we ask why. Every week, we look beyond the headlines to explore the evidence and the ideas shaping our world. If this journey interests you, consider subscribing. Leave a comment with your perspective and share this episode with someone who enjoys looking beyond the obvious. This is Beyond the Headlines, from headlines to understanding. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.